Today, I'm going to tell you about a case that won't let you sleep for several weeks. It is about this little girl called Nurin Jazlin who went missing back in 2007 in Malaysia, but it never really gotten the international spotlight it deserved, even though it is one of the most horrible and heinous crimes I have ever heard of or covered myself. Please be warned that this episode is graphic and can be very upsetting to some of you. But without further ado, let's dive right into it. On a warm evening of August 20th in 2007, an 8-year-old girl called Nurin Jazlin was sitting in a bedroom with her two older sisters. Nurin had jagged black hair and eyes and always wore this bright smile on her face. The family lived in a quiet flat in Section 1 in Wangsa Maju, which is a district of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. The three girls, who were all very close, were giggling and laughing. They just finished eating dinner, and so now it was time to prepare for the next day and then eventually go to bed. But as Nurin was getting her things ready for school, she noticed that she didn't have enough of her most favorite hair clips. And because she wanted everything to be perfect, she stood up and walked over to her mom, Nurin Jazlin, who was still in the kitchen entertaining a guest. When Nurin approached her, she asked her if it was okay for her to go to the local night market and buy herself a new hair clip so that she could be all pretty and put together for school the next day. The market was only about 100 meters down the road from them, and so, thinking one of her sisters would accompany her, she said Nurin could go. The little girl beamed at her and said thank you as her mom handed her some change, and then Nurin put on her shoes and by herself hurried off into the evening. Later on that night, her parents began to worry. It was getting pretty late and the little girl was still not back home yet, and because it was well past her bedtime, the parents decided to go out and start looking for her. They headed for the markets themselves, but when they got there was no sign of her anywhere. They started asking around whether anyone saw their little girl, but nobody seemed to have any answer for them. As this search was leading them nowhere, the parents decided to walk over to the police station and file a missing persons report. And soon enough, a large investigation was launched, and the whole city was practically covered in leaflets with Nurin's face on them. However, nobody was really providing any useful information about the girl. However, this soon would change. During the investigation, the police would actually manage to recover a piece of CCTV footage that clearly showed Nurin was passing by this area as she was going down the market. And this new evidence would change everything everyone knew about this case so far. In this footage, you could see Nurin walking on her own when a van pulled beside her and a figure emerged from within it. They then quickly walked over to the girl, forcefully dragged her inside the van and then sped off. This of course meant that Nurin was no longer just missing, but that she had in fact been abducted. This information sent the whole family into a pure state of frenzy. They had no idea why on earth someone would want to abduct their little girl, and so all they could do was just to plead for her safe return. But all of their prayers would go unheard with the discovery made on the 17th of September 2007, just under a month after the girl had been reported missing. Hey, if you're still watching this video, then please consider subscribing. I'm still trying to grow my channel, so all of these interactions really do help. Thanks. That morning, in front of a book distributing company in Petaling Jaya, the supervisor of a shop walked up to the front door, and as she wanted to open it, she spotted a black and blue gym bag lying by the entrance. But she decided to walk right past it as she thought it must have belonged to the general manager, and he would surely pick it up himself later on. But when the general manager arrived at the store, he too saw the bag lying there, but he said that it wasn't his and that he had no idea whose it could be. And so he decided to open it, but even his worst nightmares could have not prepared him for what he was just about to discover. Stuffed in the bag, in a fetal position, lay the body of a small child. The general manager called the police immediately. When they arrived and inspected the body, they determined that it must have belonged to a girl that was about 6 to 9 years of age, and that she must have been dead for about 6 hours at that point. Her body, that was sickeningly thin, as if she had not been fed for days, was carefully transported into the morgue, where a full autopsy was later conducted. But the worst part was yet to come. There were clear signs of strangulation around her neck area, and it was also clear that she was brutally sexually assaulted. There was a cucumber and an eggplant found stuffed inside her private parts, which made her rectum to rupture, and the bacterial infection from that ultimately contributed to her death. Someone actually leaked the post-mortem image of this little girl, and I just refused to show it. So if you want to, it is out there to find. But I warn you, it is very gruesome. And so after the discovery, everybody began asking questions as to who this little girl could have been. They compared the deceased girls to images of girls missing in Kuala Lumpur, and a possible match came out. And those girls' parents were called into the morgue to help identify the body. But because of how brutally damaged and battered it was, those parents just refused to acknowledge that that dead body could have been their little girl. There was even speculations that the girl actually could have been a foreigner, because she bare no scar from the tuberculosis vaccine, which was mandatory for all the children to undergo at the time. And so a DNA test had to be conducted, and to everyone's horror, a match was found. The deceased body did indeed belong to the missing Nurin Jazlin. I can't even imagine what the family must have been going through when they heard the news. I mean, they completely lost the hope of ever seeing their girl ever again. But now they were also faced with the horrible truth of how awful her last moments on this planet must have been like. Her remains were then collected by her father, who just had to come to terms with the fact that the body was indeed his little girl. Nurin Jazlin was finally laid to rest at the Ibu Kota Muslim cemetery in Taman Danau Kota on Friday 21st of September 2007. She was buried at around 2:25 p.m, after which the burial rituals were recited. This was an extremely upsetting ceremony for everyone involved. Not only was the family heartbroken by the tragic loss of their little girl, but they also continued to be reminded of the fact that the killer was still at large. Because of how violent the young girl's torture and death had been, a special team led by federal CID director Christopher Won-Soo-Ki was formed, as everyone wanted to get to the bottom of who the killer was. The director said to have special strategies and networking systems in place, but also admitted that it was entirely possible that the vigilantes had fled the city because of how heavily covered this case was in the media. There was even an attempt to charge the parents with negligence, since this is a punishable offense according to the Child Protection Act 2001. They were suggesting that it was their own fault that their daughter had been abducted, because they were too careless and didn't take her safety seriously enough. But this was heavily criticized, and the vice chairman of the Malaysian Crime Prevention Foundation, Tan Sri Lanthai, spoke out to say that the parents had been through enough, and that there was no need to punish them further. Instead, the public and police should really come together and bring the real perpetrator of this heinous crime to justice. Eventually, on the 28th of September 2007, 5 suspects, so 4 men and 1 woman, were arrested, and these were all in the range between 27 and 35 years of age. The woman, however, was released the same day, and eventually, after 7 days in custody, due to the lack of evidence, the 4 men were released as well. One more arrest was made on the 2nd of October, and this one was quite interesting. This was of an Indonesian woman called Negeri Sembilan, and she was found at the market in Nilai. This market was about 15 kilometers away from the Seremban area where Nurin was to be seen on the 5th of September. As Negeri was approached, she quickly swallowed her SIM card that she had on her, and apparently she used the SIM card to send a string of text messages to the police, claiming Nurin was in fact with her. However, Negeri, who was an illegal immigrant, then confessed that she had actually never had Nurin with her, and all of this was just a hoax. The investigators did try recovering the SIM card, but apparently all the data on it was lost. After this, with no new leads, the police actually offered a cash reward to anyone who could provide information that would lead to the arrest of Nurin's killer. And this was actually doubled by an anonymous businessman, but still no new leads came. A huge milestone did end up happening on the 11th of October 2007, when an enhanced CCTV footage was released to the public that had been actually found a month prior to that. This 8-minute long footage has 2 parts. And you can clearly see a man arriving on a motorbike and then carrying the gym bag with Nurin's body inside it over to the shop's entrance door. He then returns to the motorbike and speeds away. Many suggested that because he arrived on a motorbike, he must have been a local, or at least been staying locally at that point. But sadly, the footage was still too grainy to get a better look at his face or at his license plate. And again, this could have been his, or it could have been rented. But if the police did have that information, they could have gotten much further with the case. In the second part of this video, we can see a woman wearing a red long-sleeved top and dark jeans loitering around the shop. She is then getting picked up by 3 men in a van and speeding off. A photo fit of that woman and one of the men was later released to the media by police because they were hoping that someone would recognize them. But so far, this has not yet happened. And it is entirely possible that these 4 people had nothing to do with the murder, and that they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But equally, this case received a huge amount of spotlight across the news and media at the time. So you would think that if they were innocent, they would just come forward to say that they had nothing to do with the case. In 2008, an alert system was set up. This was initially known as the National Urgent Response Information Network, which spells Nurin, but this was later renamed to Nationwide Urgent Response. Nurin's father really hopes that the name can be reinstated back to Nurin, as he hopes that she would never be forgotten that way. And this is in the same manner as the Amber Alert in the USA, which was named after Amber Hagerman, who was a 9-year-old girl that got kidnapped and murdered in 1996. 11 years later, so in 2018, Nurin's father pleaded again for the case to be reopened, but this has not yet happened. Jasmine says that on the night of Nurin's disappearance, he actually didn't get to see her. He had gotten home from work earlier that day, and because he was exhausted, he went on to take a nap. And when he woke up again, Nurin was already gone. He also says that he just cannot accept losing his second-born daughter like this. He continues to lose sleep over the fact that her torturer and killer is still out there, walking free. He still posts on social media wishing his girl a happy birthday every year, and says that people continue to stop at his stall asking if he's Nurin's father, as they can see a picture of her standing on the table of the stall. And even now, 18 years later, we still have no idea who Nurin's killer was. Many questions still remain unanswered, and the family continues to be absolutely heartbroken over the fact that this horrible monster has managed to get away with such a heinous crime. At the time of the investigation, the authorities actually revealed that there had been many sexual assaults against very young children in the area, especially girls. They were usually lured away with the promise of ice cream and then dragged into some dark alleyway where they were sexually assaulted and defiled with eggplants before being released again. There was another case of a 6-year-old girl who had been abducted from a kindergarten by a man wearing a yellow t-shirt and a black helmet. He had asked her to help him find his cat and promised her some ice cream as a reward. He then drove her away on that motorcycle into a house where the little girl was sexually assaulted. Her half-naked body, covered in blood, was found 6 hours later near a shop in Pataling Jaya, just like Nurin's body was. And this all sparks a debate whether this was actually the work of a group rather than individual. Either way, psychologists have chimed in and said that people who commit crimes like this, they actually suffer from sexual disorders and serious mental issues. These people take pleasure in their victims being completely overpowered and unable to do anything. They're also able to pretend that they're kind and affectionate, and so that's how when they talk to children, they're able to persuade them to go away with them. I also wonder if perhaps the reason for this was to create content for the dark web. You hear about all sorts of really messed up things going on there. And so it is possible that this was actually executed in front of a paying audience. Sadly, videos like these go for a really high price, and some really twisted individuals out there are willing to pay extra if the victim in this video dies. Lots of people also confess that this has really opened a lot of parents' eyes, and as a result, children were not being able to let go anywhere on their own anymore. And this necessarily was not a bad thing, as you could just really never know who your child can run into, especially at night in a crowded city like Kuala Lumpur. So hopefully more abductions were prevented from that action. But to date, who the actual perpetrator of this horrible crime was still remains a mystery. And so it is entirely possible that they are still waiting out there, ready to pounce again.